Welcome to the meeting of the South Burlington School Board. And I'll call our regular meeting to order. Any comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda? Seeing none, I will move on to any amendments to the agenda, which we don't seem to have tonight. So
I'm wondering, do we have to change the school safety zone from action? Because I don't know that there's an action to be taken tonight.
It could be an action to continue to pursue it. It could be it was some direction to me or board representative to do more. I think it's fine to have an action item on it, but I think Martin's right. There's not a formal written document of acceptance. But that's why I kept it.
all right.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and we'll move on to agenda item 5, the update on the methadone clinic.
Again, not a lot's changed from the last time I reported to you. The methadone clinic is currently in operation. I haven't received no additional information on continuing to increase their amount of participation at this time. I am aware that 7 Days did an article, I think, this morning or yesterday, and I'm aware of a quick WCAX interview that happened this evening as well. By interviewing the 7 Days reporter, I believe. So our appeal continues to be active. I have no update for you at this point. And so we're continuing to move forward. The school year is certainly going forward appropriately. Again, safety measures and protocol procedures are in place that I talked to you about before around added security on the campus, the relocation of our facilities and safety department on the north side of the campus, organized route for them, thinning of dead trees, increased lighting, talking with the school resource officers and police department. So that's where we are.
All right. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Great. We'll move on to our student representative report, our first of this year. Sabina.
Hi. So the biggest thing I think going on is that next week is Spirit Week and then homecoming. So the student council's preparing for that. And then Friday is our Unity Day. So everyone's going to get the winning Unity, which is a contest we have for all students. They can design a t-shirt. And then, so the day ends in a pep rally. And then there's the homecoming parade on Saturday. And that starts at around 3:45. It's open to the public. And then if it gets rained out this year, we're doing hallway decorating inside the school. So that'll be open to the public as well. It
was rained out last year.
Yeah, and the year before that.
The year before, oh boy, so we've got
a plan B this year.
Track record.
So.
Good. And did you get or pass on the Sandy Dooley memo that we got?
I did not.
Okay.
I haven't had a chance to do that.
We'll may forward something to you, Sabina, regarding one of our former city councilors had a program that they were interested in getting some folks interested in participating at the high school level. I believe it was related to diversity.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll pass that on to you, and maybe you can circulate it to the right folks as well.
Definitely. Cool.
Great.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Good. All right, we'll move on to David's superintendent's report.
Yep. So again, I've commented on here, and again, I don't want to make you feel like I'm putting things off in any way, but again, we're close to, pulling all of the information on the fundraising together. John's been doing a lot of that work for me. I don't know what fraction you'd say we are, John, in having everything together.
I have 75%.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So anyway, that is on the agenda for October 16th, and obviously I'll have that out to you in a timely manner so you'll be able to have a chance to review it and ask any questions that you might have. Again, I think in just general, the fundraising, I continue to reflect on what this means. I think fund and fun, should be synonymous. It should be something that's fun for our students to do that connects to the community. And I'm worried sometimes about, do we have that right balance? And so do our guidelines provide the clarity necessary? Are we appropriately enforcing the guidelines? Are the guidelines need to be revised? What's the amount of money that's coming in for what et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I have a desire to make sure fundraising is fun and does serve the public in the right way. And that's really the intent, and I think, again, we'll talk more about it as that comes up.
Yeah, I know I got a, copied on a response to a request from the public specific to the most recent, or one of the recent fundraisers. Is that something that the rest of the board could be copied on, or do you want to include it in the total packet?
No, I think that's fine. I'll include it in the total packet, but I'm happy to provide that to the others on the request that was just provided.
Great.
That
Yeah, I
one.
think that would be some good background information.
The elevator at the middle school, again, as you all know, we are in the process of a pretty elaborate access study continued at the high school. That said, you all know that we had elevator corrective actions here at the middle school, and a good chunk of the last part of the year. Last year, we made major replacements. We did have a hiccup with that elevator here at the middle school, a brief hiccup, where that was briefly out of service, which I think for me, and I think for the staff that are around me, put up some red flags. And so we have entered into, kind of along with our access study, looking at some reasonable redundancy questions. What does that look like? This school, I think if you were to build it today, you wouldn't have one elevator with the ability to have the kind of access that you need in the size square footage. So we're looking at currently at this school what would be a reasonable kind of redundant piece of equipment that could be added. And again, I'm wanting to see what that looks like and what does that mean, and I'll keep you posted on that. At the high school, we do have 2 elevators, but that said, one is really only able to have total capacity. The other one is limited, very limited in its capacity, and doesn't get you to all the locations that you really need. So again, you're going to hear more about this in the access study, but also I think it's important for you to know that, with elevators and the need for redundancy when one goes down, so that folks, staff, students, and community can get to where they need to go in spaces that are, very specific to the need. So I don't know if there's any questions around our current elevator situation.
Are the hiccups covered under the current maintenance agreement that we're paying?
They are, again, and they're very quickly resolved, but the fact of the matter is, even as you can imagine, for any of you, just even while you're on the elevator, a brief hiccup is a moment of, not being able to get you where you need to, and certainly a high level, some level of anxiety that goes along with it. So, we're really mindful of that, and, I think you all know we're committed to wanting our building to be accessible for all. So anyway, particularly while I'm in this kind of crazy apparatus, access and handled doors and all that stuff certainly makes sense.
Does the study look at some option for non-mechanical, like ramp type?
That's all part of the access study, and when you see that from us, there are some ramping suggestions. There will be ramping suggestions. The situation in this particular school is you can't ramp to the second floor. Obviously, there's other types of things that we think might be available to help that may not be regularly used, but could be used in the event that the other one is down, for a period of time. So, I don't know, John, anything you want to add to that? Or
I think the big thing is if we have kids who need the access and they're on the second floor and the elevator goes down, that's a problem. And also accessibility programs on a regular basis. We were in May and June, we had to move all our programs downstairs, and if we have trouble, if we don't have a backup, then that's a possibility again, and it's not a great situation. The high school study will look at all kinds of accessibility for bathrooms that we have, all that kind of thing too. But we're focusing, the elevator there is 8 years older than the elevator that malfunctioned here. And so we're pretty much focused on that as a first priority.
But your question, yes, maintenance agreements are all in place and responses have been appropriate. It's just, the need for this more focused attention. So the other part I have on here is the We Belong program. I think at a fair amount of times I've talked to you about, the desire by the district to be what I'm going to say, more mindful of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that's kind of been our desire. We've spent a fair amount of time to date learning more, reading more, meeting. We've had retreats. Administrators have had retreats on this. And so the We Belong program actually is part of the Community and Economic Development Office. There's the We Belong program. And so they actually, there was a mutual connection for us between me and them. And they do believe we're in a really, I would say, appropriate position to take advantage of AmeriCorps volunteer to continue to help our work. So this, we're in the kind of initial approval phase. My hope is that an individual would significantly help us advance a lot of our needs to be more inclusive and more knowledgeable of diversity, et cetera. So it doesn't mean that when the position is done that we're then going to embed it into our local program. It's more about getting our policies, procedures, our hiring practices, education happening. Again, trying to help with a little bit more of a push in resourcing to make that happen from some skilled workers. So, this is not the answer all, right? The answer all rests with us, the leadership within, to help make sure this is happening fully inclusive. But I do see this as a positive opportunity to help this work. Again, and so I just want to make you aware that Karen Dancher in our office, again, new HR director, has been instrumental, and it's an important alignment for me around not only our hiring practices and procedures and how that aligns into our continued staffing in the district, as well as educating teachers and staff and administrators on how we can be more aware of our environment. And
So is the grant for the AmeriCorps volunteer?
Correct.
On a
Mhm.
full-time basis?
Right now, that's the request, is a full-time basis, and again, they pick up costs, and we have some cost to that as well.
And this individual would report in through HR then?
Correct. Right now, that's where I'm, there is a need for a committee, a steering committee essentially, and we've named those individuals and informed kind of the administrators of who we're thinking. Again, Stuart plays a major role on that, as does Karen. We've got a guidance person on here. We really want to make sure that again, this would be kind of the steering committee. Then there's a more involved committee below that, which would involve student and parents and et cetera, to really make sure we're mindful of all of those things.
And who scopes out the assignment of the volunteer?
Yeah, this is in part, from what I know, again, we have additional training to go, but this is done through the CEDO office, who they actually work with us around the AmeriCorps selection. AmeriCorps volunteer.
Yeah, but how do we communicate what we believe our needs are that we want the individual addressing?
Yeah, so that's done through kind of what I'll say, an interview process, where we're interviewing the candidate or candidates that are interested in this position.
I'm still, so are they telling us what they
No,
want to do?
we tell them through, our selection of having the AmeriCorps volunteer what we're looking for, and we try to make that match will happen, is our hope.
Well, I guess my question is then, do we have anything in writing that scopes out what we're looking to accomplish with this grant?
Yes, we have put forward an initial kind of proposal around what we're looking for, all of what you've heard before, and I'm happy to share with you kind of that initial grant proposal, which we would like to be considered. Again, we're in the initial phase of that. But all of the things that we've talked about before around equity, inclusion, hiring practice, being mindful of our diverse population, looking at the future. So I think it would be good that I can just forward you our initial
If
kind of
there's an
application.
executive
Yep, there is.
summary, or I don't know how big
No,
a
there
grant
is.
is, but if there's some kind of summary of the scope of the project, I think
It's fairly new. I mean, we have,
We'd be
this is
interested in that.
this is fairly new. And this last week actually was, Karen submitted on my behalf. I was out for a bit, and so we did review it on the phone, and it did get sent in, so.
Great.
And again, we had a lot of involvement before that around what we were looking at, should we, shouldn't we? And again, I look at this as an opportunity to take advantage of some resources, at the same time knowing that I have a need to advance some of the practices within the district. So anyway, I don't want to make you think that this is all, you know, if we don't get this, we're not going to be.
Right.
But again, I see this as an opportunity, so,
Yeah.
the We Belong program.
Good. Any questions? Great. All right, we'll move on to agenda item number 8, administrative reports on a legislative update and impact on the district. And I'd like to welcome Steve Dale, Executive Director from the Vermont School Board Association. Welcome, Steve. And all I can say about our superintendent
they'd
is you should have seen the other guy.
I was sitting here trying to figure out what.
Yeah. Hi, Steve, good to see you.
Good to see you, David.
Good, and I'll turn it over to you, Steve. We've been interested in really, I know Martin and Diane had a chance to participate in the regional meeting last week, and they did share a little bit of that information with the
They
board
really
so
did?
far. Really
I
did.
thought they did an excellent job of kind of boiling it right down. It was
Good for them. It
Yeah.
needed to be boiled,
But, yeah, we've had a number of discussions about kind of what role this board can play with the legislature and supporting the School Board Association, and also some observations that there seem to be some additional initiatives coming down our way as the education office sort of gets firm footing in Montpelier. So there's an interest in understanding kind of how to anticipate some of those initiatives and accommodate accordingly and prioritize with what we're doing on a local level.
Great, okay. Well, I thank you very much for inviting me so I could come spend a little time with you all. I've met, I think, most of you.
Our newest board member, Dan
Okay.
Fleming, is
Yeah.
taking
Nice to meet you.
the seat that Rich Cassidy had to step down from
So brand
until
new.
March.
Were you on the board previously?
In
or-
some sense, I'm ready.
He's been an active.
Very active citizen.
Yes, very much so.
Right.
We've, and been on a lot of our committees too, so.
Well, welcome to the board. Maybe I'll just stand up so I can, and I've got a few things to hand out to you. I want to make sure this time, and we have up to a half an hour maybe? Is that
Let me check
correct?
my agenda.
I think?
Yes, we do.
We
So
want to
it's-
make sure we're following school board, agendas.
Absolutely,
and
follow the agenda. So this time is your time, and I want to make sure that we talk about what you want to talk about. I came prepared tonight to share a little bit with you of the environment that has been in existence for the last year or so, just so you have a little context. I was then going to talk about a few of the highlights of things that were discussed last year during the legislative session, a couple of which we'll be carrying on into the next version. And then I wanted to make sure that I had a chance just to hear from you on anything that you're concerned about, you have questions about, you'd like us to be paying attention to. Doesn't need to be, like well honed at this point. It's really, part of what we need to do as an association is to hear from people about what you're thinking about, what you're concerned about, because between now and January, we will be formulating a coherent approach to what's going to happen during the session. We've obviously thought a lot about it, but there's quite a bit of time to keep thinking. First of all, just for those of you that haven't known us, and by the way, it's wonderful to see a student member, Sabina. Are you just starting this fall, or were you on the board last year as well?
Last year.
So
She
this
is
is
our
second.
senior. She's a senior, second year on the board. We're waiting to get a new board member, who'll be a junior.
So you do 2-year experiences. So the first year, is your role different when you're a junior, or is it the same?
You're the lead.
You're the lead this year? Okay, that's great. Well, we strongly support boards, including a student member, and we've seen a lot of great things happen as a result, so glad you're here. I would just remind you all, and I know most of you know this, but for Dan's benefit, we exist to support school boards, and we do that two primary ways. One is we serve as the collective voice for school boards around Vermont in the public policy debates that happen. And I don't have to tell you that everyone in school board roles is not necessarily in agreement on every issue. There are 1,500 school board members on any given day. They don't all see things exactly the same, and even there's a certain amount of disagreement between boards. I'd say that 90% of what, of the issues that come up, maybe 95%, there is a strong sense, I have a strong sense that, of direction. That doesn't mean everybody agrees, but it means that by and large, the school boards in Vermont are moving in a certain direction. The other 5%, maybe 8%, of the time, I'm going into the legislature saying, we've talked to our members, we've taken the pulse of our members, and they're split on this subject. So last year, when there was a proposal to do away with the small schools grants, 35% of our members receive small schools grants. There are other large school districts, perhaps such as yourselves, who might say, should we be incentivizing the existence of small schools that may not be as efficient, which is not necessarily a true assumption, so our membership was very split on it, and so when we were in the House Ways and Means Committee and they were debating that, I had to say, we have many different perspectives on this subject, and you need to kind of come down on the issues, and I can lay out sort of the main points that people will make on both sides of the argument, but I'm not there to sort of push one or the other, because obviously we're there to try to represent as best we can the totality. And the second reason we exist is to support you in doing your work. So we do a lot of trainings, we do a lot of problem solving with boards, we assist boards with planning processes. We have an attorney on staff who provides a lot of, every day she's on the phone with board members talking about one issue or another. So that's why we exist. So let me start off telling you a little bit about the context of what took place last year. I started in this role going on 3 years ago, and what I found in my first year particularly, and to some degree the second year, was that we were constantly in a defensive posture. There were more ideas. What I realized is that I had worked in human services for a long time and had a lot of legislative experience. But what I found is that in those kinds of areas, there are certain people that care passionately about the issue, and there are certain advocacy groups that care passionately and advocate as such. But in education, everybody's invested, whether you're on the education committee or not. Everybody's invested. There are countless advocates out and about, and so there were all kinds of ideas being presented for how we should alter the education program. So we spent much of our time trying to fend off many ideas that were quite destructive, and many of them were a direct attack on the existence of school boards in many respects. So last year we said, this really isn't where we want to be, it's not where we should be, and what we should be about, school boards in Vermont, is about moving education forward, not sort of defending the status quo. We're not fending off attacks. And so last year at our fall regional meetings, we spent the whole time talking about what that vision for education should look like in Vermont, and how school boards really have a role in trying to set the tone for supporting that direction, obviously working with our administrators and our staff around what that direction is, and then creating the environment, the board creating the environment whereby we can actually make a lot of the changes that need to be made, since they're not always easy, and a lot of your role is translating to the community and enlisting support from the community. Following that series of meetings, we came together with the Superintendent's Association and created a joint agenda, which we sent copies. We sent copies of the document to all of you, and so you probably have seen this before, but because it's been a while since we sent it to you back in February, and since we may want to refer to it during the time we're talking, I'm going to hand it out to you. And I talked a little bit about this at the annual meeting, at the regional meeting last week or a couple of weeks ago. So I'm not going to go through it all over again, but I simply share it with you because it set the tone for the legislative session. I've got actually another here as well. There are several different associated documents, which I'm not going to try to overwhelm you with paper tonight. But the point was that there were 5 major areas that we wanted to highlight as we think about where education needs to go. one of which had to do with how we engage every student in a high-quality education, as opposed to, I think, traditionally what we've done in this country so well, which is run a great program, and you all certainly in South Burlington have run a great program for an awful lot of kids, but we've run a great program, but there were kids that couldn't connect with that program because of our delivery system or our approach, and as a state, I'm quite convinced that we missed probably 30% of our kids. And again, it varies tremendously district to district. But, and so our collective task is, as the public education system, our job is to engage every student. It's really not okay to be missing students, and the way you do that is by, as much as possible, personalizing education, having a variety of different kinds of approaches and opportunities, and focusing on proficiency, our kids learning what they need to learn, and can they solve problems, and can they apply their learning, not can they sit in a seat for a certain amount of time and come out with a piece of paper. So that's sort of the number one thing. The second one had to do with the design of teaching and how we think about the teaching and learning process, and there's a number of collective bargaining issues that are associated with that whole conversation. The third had to do with technology and the fact that our kids really need access to technology, both the connectivity, hardware, software, but also our teachers need to really be able to adapt the teaching process, the learning environment accordingly, because it's such a different world. The fourth has to do with engaging families, that if we don't engage families, it's a long road for some kids, and we all know that if families are invested in education, kids do a whole lot better. So that's part of our task. And the fifth has to do with leadership. That it's going to be very tough to make the changes we need to make without very strong boards, superintendents working in combination, and obviously principals are the critical linchpin in terms of how it all works on the ground. And so that's like the fly-through version, but there's a lot more detail in that document. But by putting that out in January, as we did, it became the starting point for most of the other discussions. And what we found is that the governor's office, the state board, the other partnering organizations, and as I say, we did this together with the superintendents, were in strong alignment with this agenda. And so there were several things that happened during the legislative session that either came directly out of this or moved forward much more rapidly than they would have had we all been struggling as we had been in the previous few years. So I simply share this as backdrop. That wasn't just a one-shot deal. We really see this as the long view, and we need to stay on this agenda and continue to sort of assess the proposals that come forward from others, including legislators, through the lens of this document. Second thing I'm going to hand out to you is, because I want to talk a little bit about what happened during the session. You actually get the blue version there. You all should have received this at the end of last legislative session. This was our final legislative report. It's probably far more than any of you really want to take the time to read. I don't know if I have, oh yes I do, I have more copies. This is a report that's done by the three associations, the school boards, superintendents, and principals. We have a person that works with us who keeps you informed during the legislative session. But I'm going to highlight just a few things, and then we'll shift gears and see what you all want us to be thinking about in the coming year. The first thing I'm going to mention is, in terms of education quality and the direction of education in the state, there was a bill passed that was called, it came to be known as the Flexible Pathways Bill. I don't know if you spent any time on that last spring or whatever, but I will just mention it was really trying to convey to the state of Vermont and to all of our boards this whole idea that we need to personalize learning for kids. And it talked about the fact that we need to get to a place where we actually do personalized learning plans with kids and with families. It's very non-prescriptive in terms of what that means. There's a committee that's working on sort of what that means. But the most important thing is that our school districts engage with the concept. I said, if this becomes basically an IEP process that has 1,000 pieces of paper and a bunch of signatures and people filing suits over what it says and what it does, we will have lost the conversation. The message in the bill was, we need to personalize learning. And so that's about working with individual kids and families to say, how do we create a successful program for that student? And so that's now encoded, but in a very general statement. So we're hoping that all boards will be taking that seriously and together with their administration, figuring out what that means. And we know there are school districts that have taken it on long before this bill passed and actually have systems in place to do that. But there's a date for the actual implementation, which is maybe a couple of years down the road. So that was part of it. The second part of it was this whole idea of dual enrollment. It basically says that juniors and seniors in high school can enroll in a college course, and that can be, it's going to look different region to region, district to district in terms of how that's delivered. It may be delivered in your school with people who are sort of sanctioned through higher education to deliver the course. It could be on the campus of higher ed, and of course you all have a number of options. And are you doing that kind of thing already?
We are.
So, there's some school districts that are way down the road on implementation, but for some of our school districts in the state, as you can imagine, who've done nothing of that kind, and kids have had none of those opportunities, this is going to open a lot of different doors.
This opens up for more. We've had one, and so it opens up two additional.
Yeah, that's correct.
So
That's
that's a change.
Yes. So there will be a number of changes, but it also talks about the fact that we need to do more with community-based learning and virtual learning and all the other kinds of options that are now available. It basically is a statement of direction more than it is a prescription. So that was that number one, and we did participate with all of the partners, including the governor's office, on supporting that bill. The previous year, it had a similar kind of bill. It had a lot of rough sledding, but people came together in a way that was pretty unique this year. Second one is pre-K, universal pre-K. It basically would call for universal access. Where do you all sit with pre-K at the moment? What do you deliver here?
We currently have about 28 partners in Growing Kids South Burlington. So we have a pretty verbose program currently going on with the early childhood program. Yeah.
Great. Again, the impact on individual school districts will vary tremendously. But the basic belief is that about 80%, 85% of school districts in the state do offer pre-K. But because the system under the current law is so complicated, most people a lot of parents can't figure out like what's supposed to be available and how is it available. And we've got some school districts that refuse to do work with their private partners, and yet parents can't, because of work schedules, parents can't be moving their kids in the middle of the day from a school-based program to a private program, all that stuff. So what this would do would basically say that we've hit a critical mass here, that it's not okay that 15% of our kids and families have no access and everybody else does. I mean, there comes a time when you have to say there's an equity issue here. So we have supported that. It passed the House, it passed the Senate Education Committee. It's in the Senate Appropriations Committee, and there's an assumption that it will pass. However, given the financial issues that I will be talking about, you never know for sure, but that's there. By the way, you can feel free to stop me as I talk about these if you have questions. On the financial front, I talked about this at the regional meeting. In February, the legislature began to realize that when you add up all the proposed budgets that were proposed for town meeting, it was about a 5.5% increase statewide, which was, needless to say, concerning to them. It was concerning, I think, to all of us, simply because over the long run, although in the context of a 3-year picture, school districts in this state had been very conservative. I mean, we went down 1 year, we were about level 1 year, we were up 3%, and then it was followed by this 5.5%. The reason it was so upsetting is because the student population has continued to fall a couple percent a year. We're down probably 15% over the last decade or 12 years, and yet the overall spending has gone up, and the per pupil spending in the last decade has almost doubled. And so because of all those numbers and those trends, there were a lot of discussions during the legislative session about ways to force reductions. Nobody knew what to do about it exactly, and so there was like brainstorming ideas, and the worst kind of legislation is like people have a brainstorm and the next thing you know it's like in a law, and then people start thinking about, well, who would be affected and how. So it got really messy. In the end, basically what they passed, the only thing that they passed that I'm remembering that was of real substance was a change in the excess spending threshold. Where do you guys sit relative to the excess spending threshold?
We were at 117 last year.
117%, all right.
Against the 125 standard from
That's
this
right,
year, yeah.
okay. So the threshold, for those of you that are not totally tuned into it, is that if you spend more than 125% of the average, the statewide average, everything above that number is in essence double taxed for your local electorate. And so most boards, like at the start of the process, like sort of have that number in mind, and like that's sort of a hard threshold. They reduced it from 125. This year it's I think 123 for 2 years, and then it goes to 121. We basically said we thought of all the things that they were talking about that was probably the most reasonable, because it first of all, it would affect relatively few districts. I mean, it wasn't some kind of a, like, let's ransack the system. And it also conveyed the general direction that they wanted to go, but it didn't micromanage. The concerns that we have are things where they're basically going to do a statewide, and these were included in the plans that were put forward, go to 16 supervisory unions, which of course would have put you squarely in the middle of a great, huge supervisory union in Chittenden County. To go to 30 supervisory unions. There were all kinds of ideas about, in order to pass a budget, you had to get 2/3 of your townspeople to vote in favor of the budget, and if you didn't, you had to live with last year's number. There was a proposal to, if fewer than 50% of your electorate failed to participate in the election, you would have to live with last year's budget. Obviously, those are serious, basically attacks on democracy. I mean, there's nothing else that we do in our society, basically, other than constitutional amendments that requires those kinds of votes. And in some of the small towns in Vermont where they still have a town meeting day vote, and you may end up with 200 people or 150 people at the town meeting. I mean, it pretty much would have put town meeting out of business in Vermont. So needless to say, it wasn't popular, but these were the kind of ideas that people began to put forward as ways to try to restrict spending. That issue has not gone away. And so as we look at what's going to happen in the next legislative session, I think we need to be prepared, just as we did last year relative to education quality. We need to have some ideas about what can we bring to the table, because the solution to the trend line has to be shared by local boards and by the state. And if, I told the folks at the meeting last week, we had a joint meeting with key legislators last winter, and one person said, I'm bringing a message from the speaker, which is that you need to fix this problem or we will. And I said I didn't care for the spirit of the conversation, because obviously it's easy to get into the blaming business here. You got local boards looking at real budgets, real people, real kids, trying to figure out how you fashion the best program you can for your children. And people don't take that lightly, and they work real hard at it, and they end up at a certain number. I think from the state perspective, people say yes, and we have 288 locally elected boards in this state, and they're all doing that process. But at the end of the day, all those numbers get added up, and now we've got to raise the money. And so somebody's got to have a statewide view. So part of what we've seen our role being this fall is to convey the message that you need to be focused on your school and your kids and your system, and you need to have in the back of your mind, there's a statewide picture here, and if all boards kind of carried that perspective, we can do the best we can to bring our our efforts to try to keep that number. My concern is that if it's 5 or 6 or 7% again this year, there will be some kind of massive statewide solution, which may not be a solution, but it will certainly help people feel like a solution has been delivered. There does not appear to be a lot of energy around attacking the basic education financing system. The Brigham decision is strong, it's clear, and so the basic system, I expect, will remain intact, but I wouldn't be surprised if people want to try to do some kind of statewide strategies. Another category last year was there were a couple of labor-related issues. One was agency fee. I'm sure you were informed of that. I mean, I know you were informed of it because we sent you 100 emails about it. It passed the legislature. It passed pretty very overwhelmingly in the legislature. We made clear repeatedly that we were concerned that it tilted the bargaining table. It took a bargaining chip from the table and from the perspective of the board, and if we just don't, we felt that is short-sighted on their part. That was not persuasive. They did do 2 small concessions, one of which is meaningful, the other of which is probably not. One was that part of the concession was that any new money generated for the NEA was to be used, and this, by the way, this wasn't just teachers in the NEA, this was all, basically all public employees and some private employers, and a number of different unions that are connected. But any new money generated is supposed to go largely to dues reduction rather than to capacity building within the union. Because our concern was that, I mean, there's a lot of money on the table in terms of the new money to be generated, that it would further strengthen the balance at the bargaining table is critical for there to be effective collective bargaining in this state, and that was our concern. The other thing that they threw in at the end, the last day, was an exploration of the benefits of merit pay. There are many things that ought to be considered by the legislature in terms of changing the sort of the overall labor law. This is one that we have not been necessarily passionate about, because merit pay assumes you've got a very credible evaluation process, which we do not have on a statewide basis. So it's very tough to have a credible merit pay system without it. So it's one of those things that may or may not go anywhere. There's a study that's going to go on and a report that has to be submitted to the legislature. The other, you know, I don't want to get too much more in the weeds here. I'm going to just, I'll throw out, there's 5 others. The fact that the state is providing free lunch for kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch, we supported that. Fairly small investment, and there's strong evidence that kids who get free lunch take advantage of lunch. Kids that get reduced lunch don't. And so, and the state funded it. So the legislature funded it, and we're always glad when there's a great idea, a great new idea, and the state's willing to put its money where the concepts are, because it's fairly rare. So this was a good one. Concussions. You know, they just passed a concussion bill a year ago or 2 years ago, and this year they insisted on taking it up again. And are you aware of what they added to this one? They added that you have to have a medical professional for any collision sport, but the collision sports that were chosen were, you know, there's some debate about what's a collision sport, but and it did add cost. And then again, in the financial environment we're in, there's concerns about it, but obviously concerns about head injury are very, very legitimate, and it's a tough one to argue against. There was a requirement added for superintendent and board chair training together, so we will be working together with the Superintendent's Association to make sure there's some good offerings that would make that productive. There was a bill passed about tuition overcharge and undercharge. Have you guys been informed of that one? Basically, the issue was that we had some school districts that were lowballing their advertised tuition. So a whole bunch of kids ended up, actually they were encouraged, families were encouraged to enroll their children in that lower tuition school, and they did. And then, of course, but later on, it was determined that it was about 50% off, or 25% off or something. And then all of a sudden, this huge bill came due following the end of the year, a huge bill, and it put people into deficit and caused all kinds of problems. So this bill simply says there's a window. It tries to reduce the likelihood of that happening, which I think is fair for all of our districts. So anyway, those are some of the there's lots of other miscellaneous things you can read about. So as I look out in the new year, the financial issues will continue to be big, which we can talk about. The pre-K bill will pass. There are concerns. There's a bill around equity with independent schools. That independent schools that get a lot of public money ought to be expected to meet most of the standards of the public school system. That bill has been stalled, but it's still got some life. There is a bill about, there's all these bills about forced consolidation and a new statewide plan for the distribution of school boards. The governor has been very clear that he's not interested in a forced plan of any kind drawn up by Montpelier. He met with us a week ago at our board meeting, and he basically said, if you want to see a mess, have Montpelier redesign the school district boundaries. And certainly if local people can come together and do new and creative things that save money and do a better job with kids, we ought to be doing that. But a state plan is not one of them. However, there are bills in the mix still. So let me stop there and just ask you, are there things that you would, either you're concerned about anything I just said, or are there issues that you would like to see us paying attention to as the new session comes into focus?
Can you tell us a little bit about what the association's doing with respect to the education quality standards that are being worked on, as well as the associated evaluation standards or teacher evaluation?
Okay, let me start with the evaluation ones. We have a representative on it's called Teacher Leader Effectiveness, I think is what it's called, work group, that's designing guidelines for teacher evaluation. So we have a representative on that committee, but obviously the board role is less intense in that one than the role of principals, superintendents, teachers, but we're there. To be blunt, I think it's very general. These are guidelines. They're out there for districts to adopt or not adopt. They're not terribly prescriptive. And so there's a lot of work that I think local folks still have to do to actually implement that plan. So it's not this sort of, there's been some states in the United States that have adopted a statewide plan that's prescribed, everybody has to do it, and this one is quite soft. I don't know, you don't have a representative on that, do you?
We do not.
Okay, I didn't mean the board necessarily, but in the district.
But wasn't,
Well, we have,
oh, no, that was the EQ.
I don't think we have at the table membership.
Well, actually, Jay Hoffman has been on that
Oh, that's
table.
true, that's right, he is.
So-
Yes, he
so
is.
we do-
That's right, he
We do
is.
have somebody.
Yeah.
Yes.
Plus, I keep in touch with Jay Nichols, who's
Yep.
been on that table a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, I mean, you should have them presented to you because I'm not an expert on it, but I know that the general reaction was that it's progress because it's been on the table and there's been discussion, but that the product is pretty non-prescriptive. And some people view that positively and some people don't. In terms of your other question, which was the EQS, Education Quality Standards. We have a representative there as well, Harry Frank, sits on that committee. The concept, we strongly support the concept. The devil's always in the details. So the previous EQS basically were the kind of, it's detailed prescription of a lot of inputs. How many square feet, which classes, it's a lot of prescribed inputs, how many minutes, how many hours. And so the theory is that we need to get away from prescribing endless inputs that somebody can come in and do a bunch of check marks and you may or may not meet them. But we really ought to be focusing on what are we trying to accomplish in our schools, and the focus ought to be much more on what are the proficiencies we want our kids to have, so that at the end of the day, our kids are ending up able to do what we need them to do, to be able to have the knowledge base and the problem-solving skills to be able to function in the new world. So that's the theory. So there's been a lot of work done on them. The state board sanctioned this committee to work in the fall. They produced a product by June. It is now out for comment, and the first hearing, I think, is next week, the 8th of October, maybe. So if the board, or if any of you are interested in really getting into it, they're out for comment. You can get them from the Agency of Education website. And there's like a 6-month period where there'll be a lot of back and forth, a lot of input, and then they'll probably adopt something, I don't know, February, March, something like that. And then the question is sort of what does it look like in terms of implementation? Again, there are people, Jill Remick has been a key player for the Agency of Education. She came to our board meeting and did a presentation. I expect the agency would be, if the board wants to hear, like, what does it look like, and you want some samples of what it looks like, she'd probably be glad to do that for you. Diane?
Any thoughts about Act 129, school funding, school choice, money following the student? Anything that is going to come up again?
Well, I mean, this board probably better than anybody knows what happened last year in terms of the changes that were made in the school choice scheme. The governor, when given an opportunity without his coaches, sort of close by, will say, he believes he'd like to see us go to total public school choice. I mean, I think that's his heart of hearts. He hasn't said it much, except, as I say, at moments of vulnerability. But so I'd be surprised if there's some kind of new bill to do something dramatically different. Now, if you're referring to making an adjustment to the bill that passed 2 years ago to try to remedy the problem that occurred here as a result of the bill that passed.
The funding piece, the money not following the student.
Yes. It was very interesting what happened. I was in the committees when those bill changes. There was never a discussion about an intent to have happen what happened here. So it was one of those things that, and it did get discussed this year. In fact, I think you might have had somebody come down and testify.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, you did, yeah. So people heard the problem, but it didn't get engaged with. So I think if there's an adjustment, a small adjustment, you and I and Jeff should probably be sitting down to figure out what is that 1 line or 2 lines in a technical correction bill or something like that that could be done. The dilemma is that you were unique. I mean, I think this may have been the only school that was affected in that way, just because of your past practice.
I mean, we had our other partners, so it was Burlington and CVU and ourselves, and Essex.
Yeah, your old
we
consortium.
we were probably a higher volume of recipients of the choice and
Yes.
money following the kids, but others had similar. I mean, money did exchange to our other cohorts.
It was mainly in
It is
Chittenden
unique
County.
to us, though, here in Chittenden County.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah. And I think South Burlington High School was affected most dramatically by what happened. So anyway, if there's a subtle change that needs to be made, those are things that people tend to be, as long as it doesn't, veer from a policy perspective far away from what their intent was, people are usually pretty willing to do a small adjustment without a lot of hoopla.
That would be something we want to pursue.
It's
Yes.
a significant, it's gonna come up again and again for us. That's clear to
Well, again,
us.
I think, instead of money, we believe strongly, again, I think I speak for the board, about resources following students.
Uh-huh.
And, that is, the fundamental issue around the choice, and that we're open and feel that we do want kids to have choice. But when students come to us from somewhere else, we do feel that resources or aiding, whatever that factor is, needs to be following the student. To think that resources aren't needed when 20 students come to you is just fundamentally flawed.
Yeah.
And again, that's the flaw from our belief, I think, and we share that with others, of the choice bill that went through.
Well, as you know, I mean, there's nothing is as simple as it appears, because there was a proposal on the table. The governor, frankly, wanted open choice with money following the child. And that, and from a matter of sort of, as you think about it from a parental perspective or many other perspectives, you think, you know, yeah, that makes sense. We got a lot of choice towns, again, 91 towns that have choice right now, and limiting it to public schools would make all kinds of sense. The dilemma, of course, is that, I mean, they were talking about all grades originally, which got really weird, because you start talking about a small elementary school with 130 kids, and if 30 of those kids suddenly leave with all their money, what happens to the school? What happens to the rest of the kids? Do you really want, and what happens to the kids whose parents don't have the wherewithal to be driving them to some other school that's maybe on the upswing while yours is on the downswing? So that got really weird in terms of the, like, playing it out, and people said, we don't want to go there. So then they said high school only. Well, the dilemma with high school only is that some of those same dynamics are at play. We have, and you could end up with significant haves and have-nots if you did it unrestricted. And it could have a negative impact on 70% of the kids in the state, even though 30% may benefit tremendously. So it's not an easy issue. It needs to be thought through from a public education perspective. But what happened here was never intended. It was never discussed. And you had a system that worked, and I think there probably is an adjustment that could be made to protect most of what you were doing before, if we could figure it out. But we need to sit down. Yeah, Martin.
I'm not sure that it wasn't discussed, because I know I ran across a memo to the committee from the agency, or was it the Department of Education, then Agency of Education, which specifically was talking about the concern of small schools losing too many kids to other schools and not having the money, and the suggestion was that the money shouldn't follow. Should not follow.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what was kind of confusing to me with the whole law is that there already was a solution in that a sending school or any school board could say, we are only going to let 2 of our students go anywhere.
With the caps.
And that, you know, they
caps.
could cap how many kids
Right.
could go elsewhere. So the solution was there. If a school was
Control
concerned about
metrics.
losing too much money by losing all their kids, they could say only 2 are going to get to go. But then they also added and kept in this money following. I don't know if that, you know, it helps as far as
Yeah,
figuring out.
I suggest we not get too deep into this tonight, because the fact is they did expand substantially the number of kids that can move. That's one of the outcomes in that bill. It went from basically the board being able to, you know, you had to have a partnership with at least one other school.
Right.
And now you have total statewide choice, and the numbers are bigger than they were before. So anyway, it's complicated.
One more question. Is this something that the association could find out, is to find out how many kids are in fact
Yes.
taking advantage of this?
Because that data is available. We can.
Okay,
we
because
can-
it'd be interesting to see if there's been an increase in
The
movement of
utilization.
students.
Yeah.
Because certainly we think that this is killing choice as opposed to promoting
Enhancing it.
choice. I mean, at least in our respect, there's gonna be 25, 30 less kids who are gonna be able to choose to come here. So.
And we're hearing from all those families, just so you know.
I bet you are. I
Right,
bet
so,
you are.
so I mean, it would be interesting to see if this has made a difference, for if we're gonna proceed with making an argument that it should change, having that kind of data would be pretty important for us.
It would, and I greatly appreciate the fact that Martin has been willing to step into one of the Chittenden County positions on our board, so he'll have a lot of opportunity to remind us of this issue and be part of the solution, the conversations about it as we go through these next 3 months and prepare what we're going to be putting out there. So appreciate the issue, and I understand that you know, this was sort of ground zero for that issue, and Patrick was very
Yes.
articulate in many forums where I was last
And
week.
again, we believe strongly in that it wasn't just to the South Burlington to provide it exactly what you outlined in kind of these 5 objectives.
Yes.
that continue to enhance those practices. And the change actually has regressed.
Yeah, which
in our
is
situation.
obviously, which is a problem.
Yeah.
So we need to do some specific
Yeah.
problem solving.
And I'll connect with you too,
Yeah,
you and
okay,
Jeff,
and
Steve.
yeah,
more
next
on
time you're
how
in
we
Montpelier,
continue to
let's-
proceed, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I know I've overused my time. Anybody got any last issues that you'd like us to address?
You know, I think just one to bring up, I know the VSBA has kind of touted the centralized database relative to other settled contracts.
I don't want to tout it anymore.
Okay.
It's in bad shape at the moment, based on your request and a few others. I'm just going to be blunt with you. What we did was, for over, I don't know when it started, but we used to spend a huge amount of staff time. We had a person that we actually hired to come in we would gather all the contracts from every school district and enter it into a database, which was an unwieldy database. So we would get all this data from literally, hundreds of contracts and all of their detail, and they'd all be in a database. And then, of course, the complaint was, you can't manipulate the database because it wasn't apples and apples. It was, you almost had to sort of wander around in it to try to find anything that would be of help to you. So our commitment has been to find a way to give you a lot less information, but much more nimble. So, if we could at least give you the comparative, starting teacher salary, base plus 50, plus 15 or plus the 30, certain maybe step 0 or step 1 and step 15 and the top of the scale, or so maybe 3 or 4 data points, so that you've got, so that's all we're trying to gather. Because the other part of the problem was that we had a heck of a time trying to get every school district to send us the information in a timely fashion. So you'd settle your contract, but then you'd have to wait till everybody approved it and so on and so forth, and then we had to get somebody to send it to us, and then we had to get it entered. And by the meantime, you've got districts all around you that are doing settlements, and it wasn't useful. So our thinking is if we can get it down to 8 or 10 data points, so that our administrative assistants can call your administrative assistants and say, give me these 10 data points, and if we get good, strong support from the superintendents, we should be able to keep it up and have it available to you. So that's our commitment. But right at the moment, it's in its bad place, and and there's been a number of recently settled contracts that aren't in there, so I wouldn't rely on it.
And I suspect, our district is no different than others, which is we have had to invest both our business management time as well as legal expense to sort of, I won't even say duplicate that effort, really to
Trying to
recreate
figure it
that
out.
effort on an ongoing basis. So
Yes.
I know in my own involvement, it's 7 or 8 years of contract negotiations that effort's been duplicated every single time.
Yeah.
No,
I hear
and
that's
it's
a
not
service.
exclusive to teachers. I would add administrators and support staff to that as well. And I think
hear
your
the- I hear the
concept
request,
of the
and,
key
it is-
indicators is a good one.
It's a service that we certainly can and should be providing to you all.
And then, just because we're going to move into this topic next, and Martin's become somewhat of an expert in this area too, does the VSBA have had any involvement in school safety zones, Steve?
We have not.
Okay.
The only involvement we have is that we have a proposed resolution, which is going to our annual meeting in October, which was driven by, it's probably not what you necessarily have in mind, but we had a situation down south of Rutland, between Rutland and Bennington, where a guy who lived next to the school was doing target practice, was shooting during the school day, and obviously everybody was nervous and upset, and they went over and talked to the guy to try to get him to stop, and he said, whatever he said, but he didn't stop. And so they went to the police, and the police encouraged him, but basically the word was, there's nothing in Vermont that prevents you from shooting on your own property. And which is absurd. I mean, it was within 500 feet of the school or whatever. So we will have a resolution that will be designed to address that issue. But I don't know if you've got a broader, I don't know if that term that you used is much bigger than that. And maybe, again, Martin can
It's actually on our
Convey
agenda
that to us.
tonight,
Yeah.
and we
All right.
would be happy to give you a copy, Steve,
That'd be
it's
great.
actually coming right up after
Okay, I may
this.
stay and hear
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
conversation, okay? I would just end by inviting you, if we're going to start sending stuff out to you as we get closer to the session, hopefully as many of you as possible can join us down at Lake Maury. That's where we discuss a lot of these things. And if you have thoughts about things we should be either providing to you or putting on our agenda to go to the legislature, please let us know. So, thank you all.
Thank you, Steve. All right, with that, we will move on to agenda item 9, school safety zone. Do we have an extra copy? Okay. Martin, do you want to read this?
Yeah, I'll kind of explain where we are. Before we get into the language, I wanted to give you an update of timing and need for moving this along. I still haven't really heard enough from Paul Connor. I guess I spoke with Paul after our last meeting, so it's been in between. Yeah, he did not have a definitive answer on whether we should be proceeding with this in the context of the form-based codes. I've come to the conclusion I think we should, and I need to circle back around with Paul. And here's why. At the most recent zoning committee meeting, form-based code meeting, they determined where the city center is going to be for purposes of this first go-around of providing form-based code. And it extends north of Williston, a bit north of Williston, just a bit east of Heinsberg. It covers the U-Mall, and it goes all the way down San Remo Road. So when the form-based codes go into play, any use is permitted within that zone as long as the buildings comply with frontage on the street and height and lots of structural kind of requirements. And that's the whole purpose of this kind of code. But that means that all uses are permitted unless they're explicitly prohibited. So it seems to me that when that all of a sudden opens up that whole area, which includes right next to the middle school and right next to Central School and close to Chamberlain.
Well, it includes, the central school is in that.
The Central School is in the middle of
And then
that
we've
district,
got
right.
The middle school, high
Right.
school is within 400
Right.
feet of that or
Right,
less.
so I haven't circled around to Paul, but I'm gonna suggest and explain that that's, it doesn't necessarily mean that we absolutely have to have it as part of the package that's coming from the Form-Based Code Committee, because the process is it goes to the Planning Commission, and then it goes to the council, so there's gonna be lots of opportunities, but I'd like to have it as close to that as possible.
So are you saying there are no exclusions currently from the form-based code?
In the form-based,
Committee?
in the form-based code, what it is regulating is the structures of the building, how built up
Frontage, height.
land,
So there's no use
how many
restrictions?
units. That's correct. And that is the concept of it, and it's not a bad concept, I mean, because as long as it looks
Appealing and
appropriate,
attractive and welcoming,
you know, as long as it's appropriate for the neighborhood.
accessible.
But I think often form-based codes will in fact have some use prohibitions. But I think that we certainly, because of the school locations, I think should be proceeding on this. But anyway, let me get to the language and explain a couple, and you probably saw my email that explained some of the issues from my discussion with Paul. But it really boils down to two main areas, and I'll hit on one other. One is what the zone looks like, and rather going with 1,000 feet or just some sort of distance, I suggested, and I think, I haven't really had a chance to talk to David, that the administration determine what the appropriate zones are that we think are appropriate around each school because of walking patterns, et cetera, to determine, obviously there could be a component of it that is we'll look at making sure there aren't, weapons or now shooting ranges, since Steve has suggested that for us, which I did not have in here. But I didn't realize that one could just shoot on their property.
Well, that would actually
But-
would be a restriction within city limits. But in rural communities,
Right.
firearms and things are far less restricted.
Right, right.
You couldn't do that in South Burlington. You can have a
Anywhere
fire-
in South
No.
Burlington? Okay, so we probably don't have to add that. But in any event, so that's, I think, beyond the board and figuring that out, and that's really for the administration to figure out. And Sean has written that in, so that can be plopped in there. So the second area that needs some attention are the uses that we'd be prohibiting. And there's a couple steps that I think we need to take for that. Sean has started us on the first step by giving us further definition of the uses that we would suggest should be prohibited. I think some of these definitions are going to need to be honed a little bit. The second, which Sean hasn't had the chance to start on, I don't know that, I think we probably give him the first shot to do it unless somebody disagrees, and that is, it's a parenthetical, it's not going to go into the language here, but it's something we need, and that is a rationale for why we have, if it's not obvious. I don't think we have to provide a rationale for why we don't want strip joints near the school or adult bookstores and such.
Some of it's
Yeah, I think
common sense, but-
some of it, it's pretty common sense. But others, I think we probably are gonna have to provide that rationale, as well as honing the definition. And perhaps I can point out a couple of these, things that we need to do a little bit more work on. And again, it may make more sense, for administration and me to work with Sean first. Again, I leave it if you guys have strong feelings. But looking at the prohibited uses, we have adult use. The second is airport and airport uses. And with respect to that one, some of this is feedback from Paul Connor that I'm kind of sharing with you now. He suggested that would be too broad. Yeah, you wouldn't want a runway, you wouldn't want something with hazardous chemicals, jet fuel, whatever, but there could be, he used it as an example, if there's food preparation being done that's going to the airport or going, that's innocuous. So this particular definition needs to be narrowed. If anybody has any suggestions either now or later, that would be great. The next one, bar or nightclub, is another one that actually probably needs to be honed a little, perhaps needs to be honed a little bit. When I spoke with Paul, in my mind, the concept was the nightclub that is going in right near Central is what concerns me. And the concern is not that there's going to be drunk people walking around during the day, but the possibility that because it is close to colleges that, and it's right across the street from the school, that after the bar closes, there could be vandalism at the school. There's going to probably be parking in our parking lot, the Central School parking lot. It's right next to the playground, et cetera. So that was kind of the concern, at least that I had in my mind, but I think we need to think this out a little bit more. Paul's concern was that with respect to Market Street, which is right by Central School, that they're going to want to have restaurants that have pubs, like a Lunig's or a Ken's Pub or whatnot. And the question is, that doesn't seem to be a problem. And actually, the definition that is in here would accommodate that. But the question is whether we should narrow it further, that it should be that a bar that's got 100, room for 100 capacity might be okay. This is stuff that Paul suggested. I was kind of thinking that gets a little bit too detailed, perhaps. But this one, I think we may need to really work to make sure we have explained our rationale for including that. Bulk storage seems pretty straightforward. Cannabis dispensary seems straightforward. Fraternity sorority house, we may need to have a rationale for that. That seems straightforward to me, though. A hospital is one that also has a question mark, and whether it should be hospital and medical facilities, or if that would be too broad, given places that are over, Well, actually, I'm not sure if there are other medical facilities that are within a certain distance of the schools right now. But that's when we should think a little bit further about, I don't know that much about that area, and what may or may not, or should not be excluded. But that one needs a little bit of work, I believe. Number 8 is relatively straightforward as well, and the main concern is hazardous or explosive materials. We probably are going to need to have a little bit more work done on that, in that hazardous materials in the state of Vermont can be fairly broadly construed, and we have to make sure that that doesn't mean just a plant that's making teddy bears but happens to have a solvent for cleaning would fall into that. So this probably needs to be narrowed. Junkyard seems fairly straightforward. Motor freight terminal seems to be straightforward. Again, if anybody disagrees or has more to say about them, please let me know. I'm going to go back to number 12 in a second. But number 14 and number 15, well, actually, those both. Well, number 14 does raise an interesting issue of whether, in fact, when we get into this a little bit deeper, if there are certain uses that we would want to have prohibited by the high school but are okay by Orchard. You know, if there was a new gas station going on Shelburne Road, is that really an issue, as opposed to if there was a gas station going up across the street from the high school and thus adding traffic? Or maybe a service station isn't a concern at all. Does anybody have a strong feeling about that particular suggested prohibited use?
I would have a stronger feeling about selective prohibited use by school, because that to me, I mean, I sort of look at the reason this is coming up is really the safety aspects for kids.
Right.
Both, you know, in school and then in transit, whether
Right.
it's, you know, pedestrian traffic or car or bus traffic. So I don't have a strong opinion on that particular item, except I think it would be more difficult, unless there were some extenuating circumstances, to differ from facility to facility, but.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's cleaner certainly that way as well. But I guess there's some different concerns near the high school because of new drivers as well. Whether that affects anything, probably not. I guess the big question is, I kind of want to understand from you folks whether service station being one, and social services for that matter, which we'll get into in a minute, are ones that we need to keep on the prohibited use
Martin, it
list.
seems like, you know, for like service station, I mean, in part, there was large concerns around proximity, you know, we talk bulk storage and things of that nature where, you know, a fire, you know, which is in close proximity happening at a service station could be, you know, significantly detrimental.
Right.
I think around like the traffic issues, I think, you know, that would be better suited for us to look at more of the traffic overlay within the district to figure out, you know, we are in traffic overlay in the city, and how regulated traffic should be part of the question. You know what I mean? Again, a service station may or may not generate a lot of you know, parking or traffic, and what would be something else. So it would seem like traffic would go through a different area than, in other words, it's attached to the service station. Service station would be more of a concern from my perspective around close proximity having, you know, imminent harm in the event that, you know, a fire or, you know, whatever would happen.
And here's one other factor with respect to service station, in that there's already a rule, and I'm not going to get the exact distance, but if there's a service station someplace, there can't be a new one within
So many,
a certain distance. And practically
Good point.
speaking, except for the high school, middle school, the other 3 schools already have a service station. Well, maybe not Chamberlain, that are within that distance. We're not going to see another service station near Central School unless these particular rules change, or Orchard.
Yeah.
I mean, we can consider a little bit further, but that one seems to be a question mark as far as whether it stays on, because it may not be a strong need, but
Only
unless
one-
you think that it definitely
No, I
should.
think, I think that makes sense. My, one kind of new, and we don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but as we look at, our evolving to a world-class education, we already have students that go off-site. So I think we need to be careful in our wording, that if we have a school within a location that might happen to be connected to a business, that would be like in a medical facility, would we then be unable to do so as a result of, our restrictions? You follow what I'm saying?
Right.
So if you, being a student now, are able to go and do a internship opportunity at Business 123, now obviously it needs to be an appropriate business, but just so happens to be there's adjoining or neighbors or upstairs that may be in one of these areas of concern. So, I'm thinking we can talk more about this, because our students do go currently off-site and have some time at different places, and I think we need to be mindful of that as well, beyond just our brick and mortar buildings.
Yeah, that's interesting concept.
Anyway.
So I'll have a question mark by service station. We'll talk a little bit further with Sean. That one could very well go. Social services, I don't know if that definition helps, if there's any way that we can narrow it, or if that one should just go.
I think that one should just go.
Yeah, that's-
I think that's pretty
I mean, unless
offensive,
there's-
actually.
Now that we see the definition.
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, that's,
I think that's right. Now, backing up to the office medical, there are just a couple comments on this. First of all, I mean, we want to make it clear that what we're doing here is not, we're not through this method trying to get rid of the methadone clinic. I mean, that's not the intent of this. The methadone clinics, moving in close proximity to the middle school and high school, just really raised the flag that something like this exercise needed to be done. And it caused the board to look more closely at other potential safety risks for schools, for all the schools. But nevertheless, I mean, the methadone clinic has moved in. Under the regulations, it would be grandfathered anyway. But it would seem that it does, as we've been arguing, presents a safety risk to the schools, and would not want to see another one brought in. But there have been, this is the biggest issue that I've heard from Paul, because there are cases that have been litigated where a methadone clinic has been barred from near a school and has been found to be in violation of the Americans with Disability Act, or at least that argument was made. I haven't read the cases myself yet. But we want to make sure that we're not falling afoul as the city. Well, the city really wants to be sure that they're not falling afoul of the ADA. And that's something that I'm going to definitely want Sean to really, he's already delved into this to some extent, but really provide a memo of some sort, I would think. And this is my suggestion to the board, that we have him do this, to explain that what we're trying to do here doesn't, if it doesn't, I mean, if it runs afoul with the ADA, we should know that and really understand that and modify this so that it doesn't. But again, I mean, we still think that this is part of the safety, the risks that we would like to avoid in the future, certainly. But it's not the only one. I mean, there's quite a few. And even with respect to this particular prohibited use, it's broader potentially than just a methadone clinic. I mean, it could be a doctor's office, it could be some sort of office. If they're prescribing Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 drugs, that is the issue. You know, I don't know enough to know if there are any kind of other offices that do that, but that's some research we may need to ask for a little bit further on.
There are some towns that have statutes around pain management clinics, because it would fall into that same category.
Right.
And did you have a chance to check on sort of where the historical charter had language.
On the two,
I-
1,000-foot, or
I
when
think it was
that
1,000,
sunset.
yeah.
Right, I looked, I didn't look for the historical charter. I had a chance to look if there was anything in the Vermont statutes that had anything like that. I did not find anything, but, you know, my search wasn't extensive.
I mean, my
so-
understanding is the charter up until maybe 5 years ago did have
Right,
something in it.
right.
I just don't know how specific it was.
Right.
But if I kind of pull up from some of the specific examples you've given, you know, they fall into a couple categories to me. One is sort of a substantial impact on traffic in the area, but I'm not sure that isn't covered by environmental. And then the other one is those businesses requiring any additional security or, if I think about some of the toxic, you know, substances, things like that, it would be additional security or regulatory, kind of that large
Mhm.
umbrella. Because those, you know, it's the potential to create a hazardous environment for students. And creating that safety zone from a literal safety standpoint, but.
Right. Yeah, and that kind of is the start of the kind of the broader rationale for why we have these. And we probably, I'm just thinking ahead, I mean, that I don't know how much we're gonna have to sell this to the planning commission and to the city council, but I would like to be prepared to do so. That's one thing. The second is that there could be legal ramifications if we just put something forth without well thought out rationales. If we're coming out and saying we don't want these things here without providing any explanation, and if it's challenged, you know, if the city is challenged and there's not been a full explanation for why we've done that, there's a better chance that the city will fail in defending it. So there's different reasons I think we should go through that exercise definitely to do that. The one other issue that was Paul brought up, and I really don't have an answer yet, and it's going to take some more discussion because I was a little confused, frankly, is with respect to traffic overlay and whether that was the right tool or not. Paul was questioning whether this was the right tool for getting at traffic issues. But we'll have to have a further discussion on that one. As far as a game plan, I would like to be able to bring this back, not at the next meeting, because I think that's too soon for what Sean is doing, but the second meeting in October, having further worked on this language, primarily with Sean, and I'll work with them and the administration to see if we can get it to the point where it's pretty close that we could be ready to present it to the planning commission. Because they're talking about it sometime in early November that this, the form-based code will be forwarded. So.
I mean, I put it on here as an action item. I think it's actually good that the board takes some action and, you know, whether it's directing, you know, me, Martin, to, you know, continue to solidify the talking points and bring back to the board for consideration to disseminate to the council, planning commission, et cetera, you know. So I think it's important that it's on here and kind of directing us to do that.
And I guess I also want to make sure that the board is okay with having Sean do a memo regarding the issue that make sure we're not running afoul of the ADA.
Any questions or concerns from the board?
Comment I would make is that I think we need an underlying philosophy of what we're trying to do here. Something along the lines of trying to manage or mitigate undue risk to the students and staff for physical harm or exposure to undesirable activities. I don't know quite how to say those things. But I think we need to have something like that that's a fundamental thing we're trying to achieve, that we can bang these things against and say, that's why that one's on there, that's why that one's on there, that way that.
Kind of statement of purpose or.
Because some of these, I think, are hard to justify against this requirement. I think the risk, for example, in the service station, I think the big risk to the students in that is fundamentally that you could have an explosion of some sort or toxic fumes, and you want those far enough away that, you know, the fire people can get there and isolate the situation, okay? So I think something like that would be very beneficial, so we understood why it is we're doing this, what it is we're trying to achieve. I think we need to do something like this, and I think this is a good effort, Martin, to push it forward. I just think that we need to have an underlying rationale.
Yep.
Or maybe overriding rationale, I'm not sure whether it's on top of it or beneath it.
I think that's very reasonable. Right off the bat, people would read the heading of the safety zones and say, this is why.
And this would eventually be subject to public comment before the,
Well, that's why.
I mean, it's subject to public comment here too, if somebody wanted to comment, but it's, but before the planning commission and then, you know, there's, before the council, so.
So it sounds like, unless I hear otherwise, there's consensus from the board that Martin will continue to move forward with David and Sean, and potentially the building administrators as needed on shoring this up for the meeting after October 2nd. Great. Thanks, Martin.
Yep.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks,
Have a good
Steve.
night.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item number 10. This is the City School Steering Committee agenda topics.
So as you know, we, both Elizabeth and I, we have a series of meetings actually that are going to continue to happen, both with myself and city leadership, both the chair of the council and currently the interim city manager, eventually will be the city manager. And one of our first meetings, which we had a couple weeks ago, was really just talking about, you know, ideas and opportunities, and obviously items specific to the steering committee. And so it's here on the agenda. Number one, just some of our thoughts. I have only my notes. I didn't get all of them, I think, but really have the opportunity for you folks also to add to the list so that we then can prioritize collaboratively with the council to do that. So obviously some of the big items that were talked about, and I'm just going to kind of, you know, just identify these. Obviously were taxes. One major area was currently, I think, equally shares around just tax implications and taxation in the city. And specific to that was, we talked a little bit about talking points specific to, from the school perspective and from the city perspective of what does it mean, you know, the increase, what's the represented outcome. And so we spent some time on that. It was also, we talked about pre-K education and kindergarten education as, you know, being an important opportunity in the city, and wanting to educate people more about where we are and what we're doing. And so that was one area that came up. There was a discussion around the audit, a kind of an audit of services, both city and school. What are the services? So digging deeper in some of the more specific tasks that we're doing that could be more shared tasks. So, you know, we're doing facility type management, so are they. They're doing some IT, and so are they. You know, the list goes on far deeper than that. So
David, is that more in the spirit of an inventory than an audit?
yeah, probably better said, maybe an inventory, but really trying to do a baseline audit of where we might have similarities
Looking for
or redundancies,
opportunities to
collaborate.
Mm.
That's right.
be efficient.
Along with that was kind of our IT and our IT infrastructures, both city, school, as you know, city and all of their services, as well as ours, and looking at that. Public facility management was one, just how we manage our facilities, how they manage their facilities. We talked a lot more about kind of useful tools. We talked about Google, and we have some local resources that might be of help with some connections to that. But again, just technology resources to help us do our more collaborative work. We talked about, you know, the Community College of Vermont and programs for distance learning that might be connected for our citizenry, both, you know, our public and community-based as well as how that intertwines with the school program. And we talked about some just general names, Tim Donovan and Joyce Judy and those folks that are really involved with CCV, obviously, and how that could happen. And then, we went off on some different areas, but those were our main talking points at this point. I don't know, Elizabeth, if you can recall. We talked in much more depth about some of those things, but those are the few that we've brainstormed thus far. They're equally going to be having the same discussion as a council, and we have said the same to them about you guys.
So David, among the things that I learned at the last steering committee meeting was that there are some intents, maybe 1, 2, 3, 5 years out on the part of the city to change the infrastructure for the city itself in terms of public buildings and location of facilities and services of the public nature. Seems to me that the obvious one is the library. There's a strong interest there to have a separate library from the one that we share at the present time in the community library. That's going to have an impact on the school. There's no question in my mind about it. And it's probably going to be a financial impact. I don't know if it's going to be any other kind of an impact. Is that going to call for a duplication of services? That kind of thing. Is that going to happen? There's also a desire to put some kind of a civic center, city, I don't know what else to call it, but a recreation civic center kind of a thing in the city. Maybe it's better that we think about some of the resources we already have to redeploy them for that purpose. I mean, for example, could one of the schools that we have located in a problematic location be a better site for that and better deal for the taxpayers than to build a new facility someplace, I don't know where, probably right adjacent to a central school. So I think, I don't know when it should go on with it, but I'd like to find some kind of a way for the city and to share those plans a little more intimately with the district.
Yeah, I didn't
for the
articulate that
for the
really
districts to interact with them in that.
Yeah, I didn't articulate it really well when we talked about public facility management. That was far,
Is that what you meant by
it
that?
really was the
I thought it was more like
comprehensive.
I frankly
Yep.
thought it was more like, what are you charging for the thing? Who's it
No.
available to? What kind of? That's
No,
what came to my mind.
It was deeper than that, Dan, and to
Okay.
include
Okay.
their capital improvement plan and master planning and visioning and 2020 work. And again, I think that is major and
Yeah,
important
I don't
work.
think we'll settle that in one meeting.
No,
I think it's going to
no,
be a continuing
Yeah.
topic.
But I mean, I think that, from our brainstorm, there's maybe some pieces that are just of interest that should be either talked about or even written about to affirm to our community so that there's, we're in concert, both city and school, around our work. So, again, I hear what you're saying, though, and again, it's a major priority from your perspective as kind of a number one item.
Well, I just think that it's not the kind of thing you want to have drop upon you as a surprise. Okay?
No.
Yeah.
Kind of
Well,
thing that you
and-
want to
and
find your way into and get the right solution to.
Yeah. And both on a short-term and long-term basis, I think having a joint plan that's presented to the community, and at a minimum, that there aren't, multiple capital projects or bonded projects that are coming up at the same time, that there is a master plan that we're kind of working against that might be,
That's That's the idea. And that
exactly.
all the considerations have been made, and there's a rationale for why. Otherwise, there are going to be all these questions that come up when you're trying to actually do something.
Yeah. And then also shorter term, I think there was a very strong interest in this audit of services, which is really looking at, both entities are managing facilities, both entities are moving snow, landscaping, hardscaping. I mean, there are a number of redundant operations that we have the potential to kind of look
Yeah,
at.
I like that one. It's inventory of this,
Yeah, that we would look
looking
at.
for opportunities there to do things
Exactly.
better or more
Yeah.
efficiently.
And then the IT one, I don't want to discount either, because we've talked about that even, within our one-to-one program. It was pretty clear we'll be at capacity with just our hard cabling. I'm probably using the wrong words, but just our the infrastructure associated with IT, and that has some ramifications that may impact the city, or the city could be helping, with that expansion as needed.
I also like the idea of under the context of CCV, although it doesn't have to be that, but the idea of trying to engage the distance learning capabilities and disseminate those to a broader part of the community.
Yeah.
I think there's potential to collaborate there between what the city would like to have done and what the district could help get done.
So in terms of the steering committee meeting itself, is it your thought that we would pick among these topics that you listed and have those?
Well, we're
for-
going to have one more meeting on
Okay.
October 1st, I believe, is it next week?
Yeah,
Yeah,
next week.
next week.
Hard to believe.
So one is to make sure that we're taking a comprehensive list back, but I would anticipate we can come back at our next meeting and present what's on the city's list, and what's shared and what may be unique, and that would go into the steering committee with kind of what are the school's priorities. And that, not to predispose a solution, but I think there's openness or receptivity to kind of some, a board representative, a city representative, kind of the way we've operated subcommittees, to sort of go off and explore with the right support from folks or an outside resource, any of these things, the audit of services, or, who's going to take the leadership role, things like that, and then kind of come and report back to the steering committee.
I think that would be a great add to the steering committee process.
Mhm.
We do struggle with the time frame, and we've typically operated an hour before a meeting that needs to begin, and I think we certainly both recognize that it's not, it's an important time, but it's often, people are not necessarily purely focused, either school board or council, and when we've had them there. So I think there is a desire to figure out, maybe a different time. I think at the same time being sensitive to the number of meetings that people go to, but I do think the subcommittee
I very much
thing.
like what I hear is a positive change, or what I take as a
Yep.
positive change in whole attitude about
Yep.
the interplay between the two bodies.
So are there any other topics at this point that you'd want David and I to take back to our next meeting with Pam and Kevin?
So what was the issue? You mentioned taxes and what?
Understanding the taxes.
It was
for
really just
community.
our, the fact that our community is going to be taxed by both entities, so sort of presenting the
Joint.
talking points and a joint, presentation.
To the community.
Be able to do that to the community, again, was the
Right,
part of
right.
the.
Yeah.
No, I guess I was just concerned that I didn't want to extend to the city council the opportunity to, they can as citizens certainly comment on our budget and advocate for things in our budget, but I don't
Or
want.
not.
Or not, but,
Yeah.
but I don't want it in any manner to seem like we're looking for their input on our budget, which
Yeah,
leads
that's
to
not the
taxes.
sense.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah,
It
that's
was
fine.
really more about kind of what Dan was saying, or Elizabeth, around, the future targeted objectives, both city and school, but from the year over year perspective, the taxation, what are the talking points specific to the city tax, and what are the talking points specific to the school tax? And recognizing that, it's important for us both to be able to talk, because when people get their tax bill, it's combined. And, for city and school officials to be able to have some level of information is going to be important to the integrity of, moving our community forward in a trusting manner, so. I don't think, we weren't thinking that we were gonna get into, questioning, each other's budgets. It was more about just an understanding of the moving parts and the effect, the net effect of
And-
taxes in South Burlington.
No, and there was questioning the last time that we brought up the budget.
The budget,
By
the council.
the
That's right, way
council
back,
of, and not very polite questioning of you regarding our budget, and therefore I do
Yeah,
not want to
I
invite
appreciate
that any further.
No,
No, it's,
Well, and I think
it's.
he's got a good point. We don't want to be in a position to have to sell their budget because we
Right.
don't necessarily
Right.
buy the you know what I'm saying? I think that needs to be separate.
No, but I think some of this is, there's certainly opportunities to collaborate and anticipate, significant increases. By way of example, when the police station came on the budget, the school board was very aware of that and very aware of the impact on voters. So we don't want to be naive either and wait until the meeting before town meeting, or on town meeting day before the vote, to be seeing along with all the other community what the impact of taxes is coming from the city. We have to understand it's a package deal that goes.
Sure.
But obviously our budgets get voted on separately, so.
It seems like earlier in the budgeting process, there should be better communication.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of resolves that one as well.
And again, our hope is to get farther forward based on our earlier one on, their capital improvement and our longer range vision, where we can look at a year over year, kind of what are the implications expected, and be able to know that. So we are able to positively plan. So.
Good, so any other additions from a topic standpoint at this stage? Right, so I think you can expect David and I will come back, we can come back on the 2nd with what the steering committee topics might look like and get some consensus on that. Good. All right, we'll move on to agenda item number 11, and this is for action, harassment of employees.
I move that we adopt the protection of harassment of well, look at this, we have something we have to change already. That I didn't notice until now, until I just read it. It's not protection of harassment. We're not trying to protect harassment. With this modification to this protection against harassment of employees, I move for adoption of the policy.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Do we have any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, with the modification of protection against harassment of employees, this policy, D6, after the 11th reading, has been approved.
Thank you, Martin, for your work on this.
We'll report that out.
We're more knowledgeable.
We'll report that out to Mr. Cassidy. All right, we'll move on to agenda 12, item 12, 2.5, financial planning and budgeting. And Dan, do you want to take this one?
You want me to take this one?
Yeah, Dan and I did have a chance to review this with David and John, and
Okay,
why don't we?
so, as distinct from what we talked about last time, which was really the accounting of what was being done, this is more the forward-looking part a bit. The scope of it has been dominantly forward-looking over a one-year period of time. So how good a job basically is the administration doing in keeping us apprised of things that are changing against the original budget, and how well do they manage to that overall budget as dynamically in what's going on. There's a lot of words in here, but most of the actions in detail number 1, which really relates to dealing with some issues that were brought up during the audit. They're listed as A, B, C, and is it D here too still? A, B, C, and D is a little buried here on page 3, sort of in the middle of the second paragraph on page 3. And they're topics that are very familiar to you, I think. We have the unfunded district pension obligation, the student activity accounts. I'm sorry, I skipped one here. The grant funding, the unfunded district pension, the student activity, and the nutritional services issues that have been brought to our attention through the management letter and the audit as the longer-term things to worry about. The issues here really are that we need to have ways to deal with these things over the longer term, and we're still waiting to come to grips with what those specific plans are. I think the administration has done a good job here in explaining what the current status is of these things, and I'm sure they'd be happy to answer any questions you have about that. But I think what of importance here is that there are two actions listed as actions not taken under the district pension plan that may come up for review in the future. One is extension of the basically employee contributions to the plan, and the idea of, it's still been on the table of a loan or pension obligation thing to deal with this, much the way the city has chosen to take care of this a couple of years ago, or deal with it a couple of years ago. So that section is that one supposed to be in compliance?
No, that's not,
So it's not supposed to be in compliance, right? So,
right.
is that, oh, I don't have the sheet, I'm not looking at the most recent one, is that the problem?
You probably are, but you're looking at the markup.
Yeah, okay. So, but because of those things being still open, that's being reported as being not in compliance with plans in place to take care of those things. Detail policy number 2 is really an accounting for how the budgets worked out versus the projected budgets. And you can see that it's really pretty close. The actual to the budget is $110,000 to the good out of 40.6 million. The rest of that is data that supports all that. And that part's been reported as in compliance, and I think we agree with, that I at least agree with that. And then detail policy number 3 is just has to do with some ways in which the board deals with things and what the board's part of the budget is and how it's being used. And so I think it seems to be fine. I think just to remind you all, the major change in all that was the foregoing of the stipend or whatever it was called to the board members themselves, and but replacing part of that with a board award budget, so to try to accommodate that for a net reduction in that from year to year. And that's reported in compliance, and I think that's fine. And then the final section here is the overall policy, which is being reported is not in compliance because of the situation in section 1. But the intent here was to try to link the ends policies to the various activities that are going on and some of the financial implications. So there's a lot of words in here to explain what that linkage is. We had some reasonably extensive discussion, I guess, about how this could be done better. I think we'd be open to that sort of thing. It's not, I mean, I think ideally we'd like to get to some kind of a way in which we understand what goes monetarily into each one of these ends policy kinds of things. On the other hand, these things are so intertwined and so overlapped that this is a non-trivial task, and actually has a potential, in my opinion, to become counterproductive because it may cause people to try to allocate ahead of time to what's getting to rather than do an analysis of it. I personally think that the board's responsibility is to look at those things and make sure that it's in balance. And that if we think something is underachieving, to help guide the administration towards how to rebalance that. Because in the end, it's, if you will, a zero-sum game. It's whatever the budget is, has to cover everything, okay? It's a question of how do you get that spread equally. So I guess with that, where I think we are with this is that we have non-compliance for sort of in-process reasons on section 1, on detail policy number 1. Those in-process things relate to how do we deal with a couple of longer-term issues.
The letter that you're referring to, which is in part connected to that detail policy 1 on the pension piece, which I meant to have this by your side.
I think the two largest of those being the pension piece and the nutritional services.
Yeah, so right now, based on the pre-work that Dan and I did with David and John, we would report reasonable interpretation across the overall policy as well as the 3 detail policies. We would report adequate data for the overall policy as well as the 3 detail policies. We would report in compliance only on detail policies 2 and 3, and detail policy 1 and the overall 2.5 would be out of, or no on the compliance. And then we would report at this stage that the compliance plan was acceptable, at least based on the pre-work we did. So we'll open it up for any questions or discussion at this point.
Maybe before you start, John, just can you just quickly go over the letter, obviously, for the, I don't want to overtalk this, but part of that corrective action, it's B on page 2, talks about that unfunded district pension obligation, and so this letter speaks to that specifically around action around all new people coming into the plan. Safe. John, anything to add to?
Well, this'll come to you next
Correct.
meeting as an action item in open session.
Right. So it's just a piece of evidence that essentially where we are with that.
So just as a question on this, since this puts a reference date of September 12th in place, and the action won't be taken till some later time, is there anybody that's involved? Is breakage in that, who may see the story as different? Then you can address that, but it's
Yeah,
just a
yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Let's not have that be a funny problem, that's all.
Yep. Got it.
I just want to make one quick comment, and it's a kind of a detail-y thing, but in the overall policy, the evidence for the overall policy, the personal development section is C on page 9. And when I read through my notes from the last time we went through this policy, we talked about sort of the narrowness of this evidence in terms of identifying the wellness initiative and PACT. And I think those are really important things, although they represent not necessarily all of what we do. And I think we have a pretty robust, bunch of choices for personal development at school.
Yeah, and so are we?
Are we, I
Exclusive.
just think that may
Good
be a
point.
bit too narrow.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, by way of example, one that jumps out at me would be sophomore advisory.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
And SLAM,
And
actually.
SLAM, I mean,
Yep.
yeah, there's just a bunch
Yeah.
of,
And then all the personal development that they monitor and having report cards in elementary school.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
Again, good point. And we
I know
can
you
go
can't
on
fit
longer.
everything in
And again,
there.
this is in support of this report, but it should be a fairly consistent
Mhm.
document that could go attached to a lot of different
right,
monitoring reports or others, so
right.
it's fine.
I was impressed with the package that you put together, or John or whoever put it together with all the supporting documents. It's
Mhm.
very helpful.
And the glossary.
Thank you, Martin, for saying that.
So is this an action item, David?
No, it's,
Well, we've got it.
oh, yeah, it is action,
Yeah.
yeah. Again, you're taking action, so.
So at this point, is there consensus with the ratings as Dan and I have recommended them to the rest of the board? Okay, by consensus, we will report this as being out of compliance, but with reasonable interpretation, adequate data, and an acceptable compliance plan. Doesn't matter. Good. All right, we'll move on to item number 13, requests for proposal for audit of teacher performance evaluation practice. Yeah, it's a lot of words.
Yeah, so it's on for discussion. And I think by your side is also some additional information for discussion as well, so.
Diane, do you want to take a
Sure.
pass at this?
So Elizabeth and I met, and it was interesting because, this is the first bullet point. There's 2 fundamental questions, and I think when we set out to do this, I think our request for proposal was more along the lines of, are we doing things right? And evaluating, are we doing things right? Are we doing what we say that we're doing and how we're evaluating. But then there's also the second question, which would broaden the whole audit, and that is, are we doing the right thing? So we could gain information from this type of audit that says, are we looking at the right things? Are we measuring the right things? Maybe we're doing it right, but is it the right stuff to measure? Kind of, does that make sense? We also talked about the idea that the auditor is really serving in a proxy role for the board, that this all came up with the request to do a direct inspection, and there were some reasons why that didn't make sense. So we wanted to sort of put it out there to see what people thought about kind of the executive a presentation of some kind, because we can't do this person is acting in our capacity because we can't be there because of the concerns about confidentiality, and so we wanted some input around that. And then the third bullet is asking, should we just answer that first question or should we include the second question? Then the fourth bullet point talks about key questions that we'd like to have answered. Are the objectives of our performance system evaluation being met? Has performance improved? Is the system applied equitably? We thought it would be important to look at each school individually, to look at how it's being done so we can have some comparison among the schools, just to see how, is it all being applied the same way? Is the workforce satisfied? It's not expected that that we can assess the questions like, is it adding value or have attitudes changed, because we don't really have a baseline for that. And then we have some recommendations below. Do you want me to read those recommendations, or is everyone reading them? Oh, no, okay. So some recommendations is that an RFP would include an example of the current process to get everyone on the same page quickly and not spend time and money becoming familiar with the model. We would want to gear up and get going and have everything set ahead of time. That the RFP should require the respondents to define the methodology, timing, phases, etc. So it should actually have what instruments would be used. Do we need to include interviews? I don't remember what that part is about.
Well, it really would be, the way this originally started out, it was going to be an evaluation of existing documentation, so that by default, it's kind of a historical assessment of the current evaluation system. And if we were, we don't want to prescribe this, but if we were to broaden the evaluation to include, are we doing the right things, that would likely have to expand beyond just evaluating existing written instruments and look at some kind of one-on-one interviews. So what we really think is important is in the RFP process, we'd like to get any respondents to the RFP up to speed quickly by including or attaching an existing evaluation process forms and so forth, so they can have those before they submit the RFP, and also being clear with them in the RFP that we want them to describe the methodology they want to use. So it really will be up to the respondents to say, we're just going to go into the files and look at what you've got over the course of 5 years. We'll statistically pick, 30 individuals and evaluate the last 5 years of performance evaluations and give you our assessment from that. Or they may say, we're going to look at 30, but then we'd randomly like to talk to 10 of those 30 and really figure out how they benefited from the process, what they found worked well, what didn't. So some kind of process that included that methodology. And there may be others that we're just not familiar with, but we want to make sure that the RFP would include from any respondents that
So
methodology.
You want to include that as one of the minimum requirements of
Yeah.
a response.
Yeah.
The other thing is, in the last bullet point, the experience as an education administrator is certainly, that's preferred, but we didn't want to limit the number of potential evaluators, auditors that we could get. So we didn't want to require that because there might be people that are used to auditing evaluation systems, but maybe not in the educational field, but they could still come in and provide a service. So with that, I would like to just see what people think about including both questions. That's not what we set out to do, and it would certainly broaden what we're asking of an audit if we added that second question.
And that's also in the context of the fact that we've only recently discussed that there may be a new evaluation system being introduced, so.
Where'd you come out and as far as considering that? How does that affect the RFP from your 2 points of view?
Yeah, I mean, my own feeling is it's premature to let it affect the RFP. I think if we chose to address the second part of the question, it might inform our opinions on a new evaluation system. And I'll just speak for myself here. I feel like we've got a lot to learn just on the first part of the process of are we doing things right? And that in and of itself can inform a new evaluation process too. One of the things, as I went through a little bit of background to sort of prepare to evaluate this, was the idea that a good evaluation system should incorporate ongoing assessment of the validity of the evaluation system. And that became clear to me that that's been some of the board's struggle, is that our current evaluation system doesn't include that element in the process, because we've struggled with just how to get the question answered of, are we doing things right? So already I've been informed personally around if there's a new evaluation system implemented kind of at the state level, that we need to determine what we do at a local level. Part of that should be that there ought to be a mechanism that it validates the value of a performance evaluation process embedded in the system. So I do think there's a lot we could learn, even looking at bullet point number 1. I have a concern about, honestly, at the expense and timing of looking at both bullet points. So.
I mean, we could start with the first one, right? I mean, in the future, if we decide that was a beneficial experience, we can go back and ask if we're doing the right things.
I like the second question because as we think about another evaluation system, I think about how we could build on what we're doing right. If we get all this information of that this is what we're doing really well, then we should duplicate that part. But to be honest, I have no idea what this type of audit costs, and adding that second huge question could I don't have a sense.
Break that out.
Yeah, I don't have a sense. of that.
Hours.
My suggestion would be to break it out into phase 1, phase 2, and make them separable, and don't make them
You could
not
accept
necessarily
one for
awardable
both.
to the same body, right?
No, I agree with that, and I think for moving on to phase 2, that we probably want to make sure that we have buy-in from the SBEA as well, because and from the teachers' representatives, because to really, I think, effectively implement changes to the evaluation system, we need them on board. That's my understanding, is how the current evaluation system came into being as a
Shared committee,
yeah, so, and we probably need some time to get that lined up too. So I agree with Dan as far as having 2
Yeah,
phases
I think part A, if you will, is answers the question that we've been asking. Part B anticipates that there's a better way to do it, and would help evaluate any change system that we might get with this new state guidance, I guess it is, right? I guess we heard the word, it's
Yeah.
guidance, not prescription.
Yeah.
Right.
And phase 2 would give us the information about how people really experience this evaluation. Because it would include those interviews. So we would get that information from people who are undergoing these evaluations, from people who are performing the evaluations. We'd sort of get real live data from people whose lives it affects.
So it sounds like we would like David to kind of modify or work with the team to modify the RFP to include 2 phases that kind of respond to those questions, and then add some of the descriptions we've got around the recommendations. I think, is there anything else anyone wants to add to that?
What do folks think about a presentation to the board? Is that
Like that.
desired?
That's
Okay.
Required.
Okay.
I mean, the top level one at least, it's,
Yeah, I
Now,
like the
When you
fact,
say is the presumption that this is the question, though, is it presumption that David do that, or is the presumption that the contracted person or operation does that?
I think the fact that you're leaving that open is a good thing. At my discretion, obviously, if we dispense the money, then I would do it, my thinking would be jointly. I like that
Okay.
it's an executive summary. It doesn't get into the, a specific, in my terms, violation,
No, it's just
So,
gotta, it's
but
gotta
so,
answer the fundamental
that's right.
question about are things
So I
done
think
right or
that,
not.
in the spirit of what you're trying to do, I think it works, and also, as I've outlined the restrictions before, it keeps us within the right box too.
Yeah, and there is
That
an
makes sense.
expectation that the RFP language will include specifically what's in the recommendation. So
Mhm.
highlight that an executive level presentation of the board is desired.
Yeah.
Okay.
Julie, did you have some?
I just think it would be nice to have the person who did it here, just, to be able to ask them logistic questions about the way things were done, and just, I think I'm sure David would know the answers, but it would be nice to be able to have, much
I
like
think
it's nice to have the administrator of a building here when we're talking about something going on at that building.
I think
It's just
keeps
helpful.
that option open.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. If there aren't any other questions, I think
Good.
we've got some marching orders there. All right, we'll move on to setting the agenda for the October 2nd meeting.
You can take number 9 off.
Yeah.
Finally.
Does that mean we're moving right into the bullying and anti-harassment of students? We got it. That's what I thought. Replace that.
Looking forward to it.
I'm looking for the agenda.
So can we take, oh no, we can't.
Oh,
take
it's right under
2.5
the-
off, right? Because
What's
we have to have
Be right
action on
before the
2.5 or no?
It's a one-pager.
2.5.
No, 2.5 is done.
Done.
We finished, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
We need to
We're
pull
gonna get the
over.
steering committee feedback, agenda feedback.
Yeah, so steering committee will come back on.
Maybe on this. Or no, one of these.
Yeah, that has to come back because we passed the.
Do you have that, Meg, right there? All right.
That's, I have
Oh, do you need it?
No, I'm okay. I know it's here.
Okay.
I just tab that one. There we go.
Yeah. John.
I'm not sure about 2.8 for tomorrow. I mean, it has to be done tomorrow to get to you on Friday to review, and because of this 1 week,
Yeah,
I just practically speaking, I'm not sure that that's.
yeah, that's right.
Reasonable.
So should we take that off?
I would say, yeah.
Was that Julie and I? I don't bring the master schedule. I wondered would it be a lot if we put on here like Martin, Elizabeth,
If we said-
Diane?
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Just on here so because
No.
I don't bring that big calendar, so I
okay.
don't remember
Yeah,
which
we
ones
can add the
I
names.
signed up
It is
for.
Diane and I, is that what you said?
I'm sorry.
It is Diane and I? Did you say that?
Compensation.
I'm not sure.
Oh.
Obviously someone would be reading it tomorrow
You're making it.
if it was done.
I'm sorry, David,
No,
want me to
that's
help
all right.
you?
I just don't think to bring that with me.
Yeah.
But it's Elizabeth and Julie.
It's Elizabeth and Julie.
2.8, Elizabeth and Julie.
Sorry, I would have done it.
But you're saying you can't,
2.2
it's not gonna be
Martin
done,
only.
right?
Me?
Yep.
So Elizabeth, we're off the hook because,
Okay, we have
yeah.
a little reprieve. And we're taking 11 off as well, because we've done that
Yeah.
tonight.
I mean, this is just a hard, I mean, right now, because of the way the board meeting sequences happen, I mean, we got board packet and we need to get out for
Right.
you right this week, so, you know, we're,
Yeah, that's
There, I know of two things. The retirement issue
yeah, that we
should
just.
be an action item.
That's right, this will be back on there, so this would be not the amendment to the non-union support staff
Mhm.
pension.
And David, the grant that would replace bridging, I don't know how you want to handle that, but that's.
Yeah, that change, so I'll put that on there. I'll talk to you a little bit about that, Elizabeth, as well. We need a changing program name.
All right, so it sounds like we've taken several items off and added the non-union support retirement pension, the grant issue, the steering committee feedback.
Can I just say, is it reasonable to have pay structure, nutritional services update, and long-term financial stewardship plan in 45 minutes?
Well, we're just giving you some updates on that. I mean, we, remember, the long-term financial stewardship plan, it's in process, so, you know,
It's a quick thing.
well, I mean, this is not quick, this is long, but, you know, we want to just kind of let you know where we're at. John's put a lot of work into it already. John?
Yeah, and the nutritional service financial
That's
Part of our
okay.
obligation.
Yeah,
Is-
that's okay, but.
is, well, it's gonna be more verbal than anything because we're September 23rd, we haven't completed a month. So I'm working with Sue Spear and Rhonda to get some just facts about
Where
how
we
many
are.
people we have working compared to last year. And how
Again,
the
it's in the
meals are
spirit
working.
of trying to, you know, as part of the
Yeah.
visibility.
Keep it in
component
front
we
of
talked
you,
about,
What about the pay structure? Sorry, but.
You know, similarly, I think,
Okay.
just giving you an update. You're just worried about that jamming us up a lot, huh?
I just think that those are all.
Well, we've taken
Yeah.
quite a bit off here.
Yeah.
Two
Okay.
of the items on agenda 10 and 11's off.
Why would we
And
take
none's on.
11 off? Don't we want to see the new version of the RFP, or is that too soon? Oh, is that, okay.
I don't know that we need to see the new version.
Okay,
we've
because
got
it
the
says
language.
action, so I didn't want it.
I don't know that we needed action on that. So we had discussion here. We don't
Yeah.
Okay.
usually take an action on an RFP.
Okay.
I wasn't sure, and we
Yeah.
put it on with the line. It's fine.
You know, just for a placeholder, I know you're gonna put this on the subsequent meeting, but I guess I'd put fundraising down so we don't lose it under future agenda. And then that
Which is
should be able to
coming
come
up,
right off, yeah.
The other thing on future agenda, the F-35 final impact statement, I think, is due
Well,
next
it's-
week.
It's actually, the Burlington Free Press reported on it tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So-
due out next week.
I thought it was due out next week.
It's due out next
It
week.
came out today?
No.
There's an
It's a
article out
preliminary.
tonight.
Okay, I
A
thought the
preliminary
final
article.
was due next week.
And, but a decision won't be made. The Secretary of the Air Force or, you know, will be making more, referrals go, there's still some time in there. But these are part of the informing dates that are coming out, so.
I just think if the final EIS is coming out next week, I heard October 4th, that we should look at it to see if our
answers-
questions
yeah,
were
agreed.
answered, those additional questions.
Yeah, and that can weigh in on, you know, yeah. Yeah, that will be probably a few pages.
Yeah,
Ron will whip
but
that off.
the answer to our questions
Will
will
be-
be about this much of a no, not
In the
stat,
paragraph,
this
yeah.
much of a paragraph.
But I know some really
much
talented board
right
members in
here.
this area.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and we'll move on to, we've got set the agenda. Do we have, oh yeah, any future agenda items? We've talked about a
Other than the
couple.
fundraising, yeah.
Any modifications to the minutes of the September 11th meeting?
Yeah, there's one on the final page, consider the minutes of the meeting. It says Mr. Cassidy announced.
And that should have been
Yeah.
changed. Dan
Oh, it was
pointed that
changed,
out.
okay.
Where did that come?
And I think the executive limitation
Might have got
policy
changed.
2.4 has a different name. I think it's called financial condition and activities.
Oh, you're right. I didn't catch that. That's a
So
good
can I,
catch.
where did you see
That's on
Mr. Cassidy?
executive, oh, that's on the final page, David, under.
The line
consider
has got
the minutes of
that,
the
I sent
meeting.
the line.
Thank you, got
notice.
it?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I just caught this one this
And what's the
afternoon.
title of 2.4?
It's a
Financial conditions and activities.
Okay, that's correct in this
It's
copy.
not on ours. It says
Okay, I
it
don't
under
know.
executive limitations,
Oh.
policy monitoring.
I think it got.
I don't have that copy.
Okay.
Yeah. Huh. I don't know why that
Okay,
happened.
so with those changes, by consensus, the September 11th minutes are approved? All right, and we have the consent agenda, which, are we taking action on that? It's down as action, but there's nothing
I
on
don't
it.
think there's any need for any action.
Okay, so we've striking item number 17.
I should have amended that.
Um,
Apologize.
Any questions on AP orders? Okay. And we've got a board self-evaluation to fill out. Why don't we take a couple of minutes and do that? Maybe, David, you can make announcements while we're doing that?
Yep. So announcements you do have at your place. Again, a lot going on, co-curricular activities, all kinds of things happening. But this week we have some open houses that are happening. Tomorrow, Thursday the 26th, is here at Tuttle. Open house at Chamberlain on October 9th. And then Chamberlain Harvest Festival coming up on Saturday, this Saturday, 1 to 4. Important to note, Carrie Town, the school nurse here at Frederick H. Tuttle Middle School, has been selected as the Vermont State School by the Vermont State School Board's School Nurses Association, School Nurse of the Year for 2013-14. She's also received National Board Certification as a School Nurse Liaison of the Year. So again, we want to recognize her and celebrate. There is a celebration coming up on a Saturday. Do you know what date that is, Stuart? Do you know when that is happening for Carrie? It's a Saturday coming up, and we're going to have some coverage there for her, and I'll let you know when that is. And then Green Mountain Habitat for Humanities will be holding a Stuff the Truck event in front of the South Burlington High School on Saturday the 28th from 10 to 1. And Sabina, as you heard earlier, there's a lot of events that are going on around the high school, around Spirit Week and homecoming and things of that nature. Other than that, things continue to be, running well. And, we're continuing to tweak some things around transportation and load capacities and departure times and some of those, particularly to the island route. So, but all in all, things seem to be going well. So, announcements.
Any other announcements from the board?
I won't be here at the next meeting.
Okay.
So be careful what your name will appear on.
That's right.
Clement?
We're going to deploy some resources at that meeting, Dan.
I am the regional representative. It was a tough fought battle to,
Congratulations. We appreciate the
Vice
representation.
regional,
Vice regional?
Yeah, there's a presidential regional.
Good.
I think that should be on your nameplate.
All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
You want to hear the results first?
Oh, yeah, that'd be good, yeah. That's for signature.
There was one disagree on agenda items were prioritized and moved from the parking lot to future meeting dates, because that did not happen. So I'm not sure why there weren't 5 disagrees, but that's okay. And there was one disagree about data reports were provided to the board in advance of the meeting in support of its deliberations and required action. Otherwise, well done.
Now I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.